What if I told you that a single phone call about a canceled doctor's appointment would expose a multi-million-dollar conspiracy? That a pregnant woman's fight for her baby's health care would bring down an entire network of corrupt lawyers and tech moguls? This is the true story of Sarah Chen Miller, who discovered her billionaire husband had canceled her prenatal care to fund his mistress's luxury spa trip. But that was just the beginning. What she uncovered next was a systematic plot to have her declared mentally insane, steal her fortune, and take her unborn child. By the end of this story, you'll never look at wealthy power couples the same way again. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will shock you. Subscribe for more incredible true stories, and drop a comment telling me what you think really happened here. Because this revenge story has twists you won't see coming. The phone call came at exactly 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Sarah Chen Miller was arranging fresh peonies in her Malibu kitchen. The marble countertops gleamed under the California sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and everything in her world seemed perfect. At 7 months pregnant, she glowed with the kind of contentment that comes from a life carefully curated and deeply loved. The peonies had been David's idea, delivered every Tuesday without fail for the past 3 years. "Beautiful flowers for my beautiful wife," he'd say, always with that smile that had first captivated her at a Stanford alumni mixer. Sarah had given up her promising marketing career at a tech startup to become Mrs. David Miller, and moments like these made the sacrifice feel worthwhile. Mrs. Miller. The voice on the other end was professionally apologetic but firm. "This is Jennifer from Dr. Williams' office. I'm calling about your anatomy scan scheduled for tomorrow morning." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, where their baby had been increasingly active. She'd been looking forward to this appointment for weeks, hoping they might finally learn whether they were having a son or daughter. David claimed he didn't care, but she'd caught him researching boy names on his laptop. "Yes, I've been looking forward to it. Is everything okay?" "I'm afraid we need to cancel your appointment. Your payment authorization was rescinded this morning by the primary cardholder." The words hit Sarah like cold water. She set down the peony she'd been trimming, her hands suddenly unsteady. "I'm sorry. What rescinded by whom?" "According to our records, Mr. David Miller contacted our billing department early this morning and canceled the remaining balance on your prenatal care package. The authorization for tomorrow's scan has been revoked." Sarah's legs felt weak. She gripped the kitchen island for support, staring at her reflection in the black granite surface. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake. This scan checks for birth defects. It's critical for the baby's health." "I understand your concern, Mrs. Miller. But the cancellation came directly from the account holder. You'll need to speak with your husband about reinstating the authorization or provide alternative payment." The receptionist's tone suggested this wasn't her first difficult conversation of the day. Sarah could hear phones ringing in the background, the busy sounds of a medical office that had no time for family drama. After hanging up, Sarah stared at her phone in disbelief. David had left for his office that morning with his usual kiss and promise to pick up dinner from her favorite restaurant. He'd been excited about the scan, asking if they might finally learn the baby's gender. He'd even joked about painting the nursery blue or pink this weekend. Why would he cancel it? She tried calling him, but his assistant Melissa said he was in back-to-back meetings until evening. "Should I have him call you back, Mrs. Miller? He mentioned something about a big investor presentation today." "No," Sarah said quietly. "I'll handle it." But as the afternoon wore on, a cold dread settled in her stomach. David was meticulous about their finances. He personally managed their premium accounts, took pride in their excellent credit, and had prepaid the entire prenatal package months ago. The man who remembered to tip their housekeeper extra at Christmas wouldn't make this kind of mistake. She walked through their house, noting details she'd somehow stopped seeing: the fresh flowers that arrived like clockwork, the designer furniture David had chosen without consulting her, the art collection that reflected his taste, not hers. Even her own maternity wardrobe had been curated by David's personal shopper. When had she stopped making decisions in her own life that evening? David came home with Thai food and his usual warm smile. "How's my beautiful wife feeling today? The baby giving you any trouble?" Sarah watched his face carefully, looking for signs of deception. "Actually, I had an interesting call from Dr. Williams' office. They said you canceled tomorrow's scan." For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across David's features, a tightness around his eyes, a pause before his smile returned, broader than before. "That's ridiculous. I didn't cancel anything. It must be a billing error. You know how these medical offices are with their computer systems. They said you called this morning and specifically rescinded the authorization." David set down the food and pulled Sarah into his arms, his embrace warm and familiar. But tonight, something felt different, rehearsed. "Sweetheart, you're 7 months pregnant. You're stressed about the baby, about the delivery. These hormones can make everything seem like a crisis. I'll call them first thing tomorrow and sort it out." His embrace felt different somehow. When he held her, Sarah noticed his phone buzzing constantly in his pocket, but he didn't check it once. The David she knew was surgically attached to his phone, responding to messages within minutes. His sudden lack of interest in his device felt performative. That night, after David fell asleep, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing her anxiety. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, the way you sense a storm coming before the sky darkens. She thought about the way David had been working later recently, the new passwords on his devices, the weekend business trips that seemed to multiply. Most troubling was how he'd grown distant during her pregnancy, as if her changing body reminded him of responsibilities he'd rather avoid. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of what was at stake. Sarah placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise. Whatever was happening, she would protect this child, even if it meant discovering truths she wasn't ready to face. Tomorrow, she would find out exactly why her husband had canceled their baby's medical care. And deep down, she suspected the answer would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Sarah waited until David left for his morning run before accessing their shared computer. Her hands trembled as she navigated to their American Express account, the premium Centurion card David used for major expenses. She'd never felt like a spy in her own home before, but something had shifted overnight. The woman who'd arranged flowers yesterday was gone, replaced by someone harder, more determined. The home office felt foreign as she sat in David's leather chair, surrounded by his awards and business accolades. Photos of their wedding day smiled down at her from the bookshelf, but they felt like artifacts from someone else's life now. The statement loaded slowly, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, highlighted in recent transactions, was the damning evidence. 2 entries from the same day told a story that made her sick Golden Gate Medical Group credit refund. $38,500. Amani Resort Bali charge. $45,000. Sarah stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Her husband had literally canceled their baby's health care to pay for someone else's luxury vacation. But who was B. Jones? The name listed on the resort booking. She scrolled through more transactions, her horror growing with each entry. Designer boutiques she'd never heard of, restaurants in neighborhoods they'd never visited together. A jewelry store charged for $12,000 on a day David claimed to be in board meetings. And Her phone buzzed with a text from David, called the doctor's office. Just a billing glitch, like I said. Rescheduling your scan for next week. Love you. Another lie, delivered with casual confidence. The medical office wouldn't be open for another 2 hours. Sarah screenshot the transactions and began digging deeper. David's recent charges painted a picture of a life she didn't recognize. The jewelry purchase coincided with Valentine's Day, but Sarah had received only a card and a promise that her real gift would come after the baby arrived. A monthly payment to something called Sunset Towers caught her attention. $15,000 every month for the past 8 months. Sarah Googled the address and discovered it was a luxury high-rise in downtown San Francisco, the kind of building where tech millionaires kept their mistresses. Her hands shook as she opened Instagram and searched for B. Jones Bali. The results made her stomach drop. Brittany Jones, 24 years old, 2.3 million followers, and currently posting stories from an infinity pool overlooking the Indian Ocean. Her latest video showed champagne and spa treatments with the caption, "When B spoils you right. Grateful for my amazing man who knows how to treat a queen." Sarah clicked on Brittany's profile with growing horror. Post after post showed a lifestyle of pure luxury designer bags, 5-star restaurants, private jets. The girl had better clothes than Sarah did, stayed at better hotels, ate at better restaurants. And in the background of several recent photos, Sarah recognized objects from her own home: the unique Hermes vase from their living room, David's distinctive watch collection. Even their custom kitchen island appeared in one cooking video. Brittany preparing what looked like David's favorite breakfast. Brittany had been in their house. While Sarah was at prenatal appointments and baby planning sessions, this woman had been living parts of her life. The worst discovery came in Brittany's story highlights. A section titled "My Love" contained months of photos with a man whose face was carefully cropped out, but Sarah recognized everything else: David's hands, his clothing, his car, their bedroom. One photo showed Brittany wearing Sarah's own maternity robe, the soft cashmere one David had given her for Mother's Day. The girl was posing in their master bathroom, the one Sarah had designed herself, flashing a peace sign and pouty lips. Her phone rang. Riley, her sister. "Hey, how's the baby bump treating you today? You've been so quiet lately." Sarah couldn't speak. She was staring at a photo of Brittany in their bed, wearing one of David's Stanford t-shirts, the one Sarah had bought him for their anniversary. "Sarah, you there?" "Riley," Sarah whispered. "I need you to come over. Right now. Something's very, very wrong." An hour later, Riley sat in Sarah's kitchen, scrolling through the evidence with the focused intensity of the investigative journalist she was. As a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, Riley had seen her share of cheating husbands, but this felt different. "This is bad, Sarah. Really bad. He's not just cheating. He's systematic about it. Look at these dates. He's been building this relationship for almost a year." Sarah felt numb, watching her sister document her husband's betrayal with professional efficiency. "The baby's scan. Riley. He chose her spa trip over our baby's health." Riley's jaw clenched. "We're going to destroy him." Sarah felt a strange calm descending. The hurt was still there, sharp and cutting, but underneath it was something harder, something that felt like power. "What do we do first? We document everything. Screenshots, downloads, copies of everything. Then we find the best divorce attorney in California. And Sarah." Riley looked up from the laptop. "This Brittany girl is about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong family." For the first time in 24 hours, Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. The woman who'd been arranging flowers and trusting her husband was gone. In her place sat someone who'd been underestimated for the last time. David thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He was about to discover he'd been married to a queen. Marcus Rodriguez had been David's fraternity brother at Stanford, Sarah's maid of honor's boyfriend, and a fixture at their dinner parties for 3 years. When he answered Sarah's desperate call that afternoon, his voice carried exactly the right mix of shock and righteous anger. "Sarah, honey, I can't believe this. David seemed so devoted to you and the baby. I was just telling Jennifer how lucky you were to have such a caring husband." They met at Marcus's downtown law office, a gleaming space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The walls were lined with expensive art and photos of Marcus with politicians and tech executives. Sarah had always been impressed by his success, but today the opulence felt intimidating. She felt small in the leather chair across from his massive desk, but Marcus's warm smile and confident demeanor gave her hope for the first time in days. He'd ordered coffee and pastries, treating her with the gentle care of an old family friend. "Before we begin," Marcus said, pouring coffee from a silver service, "I want you to know how sorry I am. David and I may have been fraternity brothers, but what he's done to you is unforgivable." Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. Marcus seemed genuinely outraged. His hands clenched as he reviewed the evidence Riley had helped compile. "The good news," Marcus said, "is that David's handed us a slam-dunk case. Dissipation of marital assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and with the medical angle, any judge will crucify him." Sarah leaned forward. "Can we freeze his accounts? Stop him from spending more money on her?" "Absolutely. I'll file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. We'll hit him with asset freezes, temporary support orders, and full discovery of his finances. He won't be able to buy a coffee without court approval." Marcus pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. "Tell me everything about your marriage, assets, property, income streams. We need to build a complete picture of what we're fighting for." As Sarah recounted her life with David, Marcus asked pointed questions about their finances, their social circle, David's business relationships. His attention to detail was impressive, but something nagged at her. "How well do you know Brittany Jones?" Marcus asked, studying her Instagram photos. "I'd never heard of her until yesterday." "Interesting. She's been tagging locations all over the city for months. David's been parading her around pretty openly for someone trying to keep an affair secret." Relief flooded through Sarah. "How long will this take?" "With evidence this clear 6 months, maybe less. You'll get half of everything, plus additional damages for the dissipation. We're talking 8 figures, minimum." Marcus leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from every gesture. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. David's not the first tech mogul who thought his money made him untouchable. They all make the same mistake. They underestimate their wives." That evening, Sarah felt lighter than she had since the nightmare began. Marcus had been clear about the process, professional about the timeline, and completely confident in their success. David was still at the office, probably planning his next lie, but it didn't matter anymore. Tomorrow, his world would collapse. She called Riley with the update. "Marcus says we can freeze everything tomorrow. David won't see it coming." "I'm proud of you, sis. You're stronger than you know. Marcus thinks we can get additional damages for emotional distress. He says judges hate men who endanger pregnant women." For the first time in months, Sarah slept peacefully. She dreamed about her baby's future, about the nursery she'd design in her new home, about the security Marcus would help her build. She was done being David's victim. The next morning, Marcus called at 7 a.m. His voice sounded different, strained. "Sarah, We have a problem. What kind of problem? David's attorneys filed an emergency motion last night. They're claiming you're mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones and seeking to have you committed for evaluation. Sarah's blood turned to ice. That's insane. On what grounds? They have documentation of erratic behavior, emotional instability, and threats of self-harm. They're asking for immediate intervention, but that's all lies. I know, sweetheart, but they have medical records, witness statements, even recordings. They're very convincing. Sarah's mind raced. What recordings? What witnesses? Marcus's pause stretched too long. Sarah, I need you to stay calm. Can you come to my office immediately? Don't talk to anyone. Don't post on social media. And whatever you do, don't confront David. This is more serious than we thought. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her kitchen, the same spot where this nightmare had begun 48 hours ago. Something felt wrong about Marcus's call. The timing was too convenient, his knowledge too specific. How had David's team prepared such detailed documentation overnight? She opened her laptop and searched for David Miller emergency motions. Nothing appeared in public records. Then she searched for Marcus Rodriguez law firm client reviews. What she found made her stomach drop. Review after review mentioned Marcus working both sides of divorces, clients discovering he'd been sharing information with opposing counsel, cases that should have been won ending in devastating losses. Manipulative and unethical, read one review. I trusted Marcus Rodriguez with my divorce case. 3 months later, I discovered he was secretly working with my husband's attorney. I lost everything. Another, Rodriguez takes your money and your secrets, then sells them to the highest bidder. Avoid at all costs. Sarah's hand shook as she scrolled through dozens of similar complaints. Marcus Rodriguez wasn't David's old fraternity brother helping a friend's wife. He was David's secret weapon, a corrupt attorney who specialized in destroying vulnerable women. She grabbed her phone and called Riley. I think Marcus is working with David. What, Sarah? That's paranoid thinking. Marcus has been our friend for years. Check his reviews. Riley, check his bar association records. Something's wrong. 20 minutes later, Riley called back, her voice tight with fury. Sarah, get out of the house. Now. Marcus Rodriguez was sanctioned by the state bar 2 years ago for conflict of interest violations. He's been playing both sides for years. Sarah's hands shook as she gathered her purse and keys. Where do I go? My apartment. And Sarah, don't trust anyone else. Not until we figure out how deep this goes. As Sarah drove away from the home she'd thought was her sanctuary, she realized the betrayal was worse than infidelity. David hadn't just cheated on her. He'd orchestrated an elaborate trap, using their mutual friends and her own trust against her. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a desperate mother would do to protect her child. The real war was just beginning. Sarah barely made it to Riley's studio apartment before the process servers arrived at the house. She watched from the window as 2 men in suits knocked on her door, legal documents in hand, while her husband's black Tesla pulled into the driveway right on schedule. He knew, Sarah whispered, her hand pressed against the glass. He knew exactly when they'd come. The choreography was perfect. David emerged from his car looking concerned and confused, the picture of a worried husband returning home to help his troubled wife. He spoke with the process servers for several minutes, his body language suggesting surprise and distress. Riley paced behind her, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with real attorneys, trying to undo the damage Marcus had already done. We need someone who specializes in emergency family law, she was saying. No, it can't wait until Monday. This woman is being systematically destroyed by her husband and his attorney. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. Sweetheart, I'm worried about you. Marcus called and said you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm coming home to take care of you. Another text followed immediately. The baby needs you to be healthy. Let me help. The manipulation was so smooth, so caring on the surface, that Sarah almost doubted her own sanity. Almost. The man who'd canceled their baby's medical care for his mistress's spa trip was now positioning himself as the concerned caregiver. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Miller. This is Dr. Patricia Williams. I wanted to personally apologize for the confusion about your appointment. I've just learned there may be some unusual circumstances surrounding the cancellation. Sarah stepped away from the window. Dr. Williams, what do you mean? I received a very strange call this morning from a man claiming to be your attorney. He was asking detailed questions about your mental health, your pregnancy history, anything that might suggest emotional instability. When I refused to discuss patient information, he became quite insistent. Sarah's blood ran cold. What did this attorney look like? I didn't meet him in person, but he knew quite a bit about your case. Too much, frankly. He mentioned specific details about your pregnancy that should only be in your medical file. Dr. Williams paused. Mrs. Miller, I've been practicing obstetrics for 20 years, and something about this situation feels orchestrated. The timing of the payment cancellation, followed by questions about your mental state, it's highly suspicious. Are you safe? Before Sarah could answer, Riley grabbed her arm and pointed out the window. A police car had joined David's Tesla in her driveway. 2 officers were walking toward her front door with what looked like official paperwork. Dr. Williams, I have to go, but thank you for calling. Sarah hung up and turned to Riley. They're trying to have me committed, right now. Riley's face went pale. We need to get you out of here. If they take you for a psychiatric hold, David will have complete control over your finances and medical decisions. Where can we go? He knows all our friends, all our usual places. Riley was already grabbing her keys and laptop. I know someone who can help, someone David's never met. As they slipped out the back of Riley's building, Sarah felt the full weight of David's preparation. This wasn't a desperate response to being caught cheating. This was a carefully planned operation designed to neutralize her before she could threaten his empire. They drove through San Francisco's winding streets, Sarah watching the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. David's reach extended far beyond their social circle. He sat on hospital boards, donated to police benevolent associations, had connections throughout the city's power structure. How long has he been planning this? Sarah asked as they headed toward Oakland. Probably since the moment you got pregnant, Riley replied grimly. Think about it. He knew this affair would eventually come to light. He's been building his defense for months. Sarah's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. She declined it, then turned off the device entirely. He's probably trying to find out where we are, Riley said. Marcus will report back to David about everything we discussed yesterday. Sarah realized the full scope of David's plan. He wasn't just trying to divorce her. He was trying to erase her completely, to paint her as an unstable woman whose pregnancy had driven her to delusion and paranoia. The scariest part was how well it was working. Even now. A part of her wondered if she was overreacting, if the hormones and stress really had affected her judgment. Then she thought about Brittany Jones in her maternity robe, about the $45,000 that should have protected her baby's health, about Marcus Rodriguez's lies delivered with a fraternity brother's smile. No, she wasn't crazy. She was being systematically destroyed by people she'd trusted, and they'd almost succeeded. But Sarah Chen Miller had one advantage they'd overlooked. She was fighting for her child now, and that made her more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The war had just escalated, and Sarah was done playing defense. Elena Vasquez operated out of a converted warehouse in East Oakland, far from the gleaming towers where Marcus Rodriguez practiced his particular brand of legal treachery. Her office was cramped, cluttered with case files, and decorated with photos of families she'd reunited and women she'd protected from predatory ex-husbands. The building itself told a story. Elena had chosen this location deliberately, away from the expensive downtown legal district where judges and attorneys socialized at the same clubs. Here, she could work without interference from the old boys network that protected men like David Miller. "Your sister called ahead," Elena said, pouring coffee from a pot that had seen better days. "This is a hell of a situation you're in." Sarah sat across from Elena's metal desk, feeling more hopeful than she had in days. This woman radiated competence and fury in equal measure, the kind of lawyer who'd fight dirty when necessary. Her walls were covered with thank you letters from clients, newspaper clippings of victories against powerful men, and a framed law degree from Berkeley. "The good news," Elena continued, studying the evidence Riley had compiled, "is that David's overplayed his hand. The psychiatric hold gambit is too aggressive, too fast. It screams guilty conscience. But can he still have me committed? Not if we move first. I'm filing an emergency protective order against David this afternoon, citing domestic abuse through financial manipulation and medical neglect. We'll also request immediate temporary custody of your unborn child." Sarah blinked. "Custody of a baby who isn't born yet. California recognizes fetal rights in cases of parental misconduct. Your husband endangered your pregnancy by canceling medical care. That's grounds for protective intervention." Elena's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, pulling up legal precedents and case law. "We've got a strong foundation here. Financial abuse, medical neglect, systematic gaslighting through corrupt legal representation. We're also going after Marcus Rodriguez. What he did violates every ethical rule in the book. I'm filing a bar complaint today. Will that help my case? It'll destroy his credibility. When a judge sees that David's own attorney was sanctioned for playing both sides, it raises questions about everything Marcus filed." Elena opened a thick file drawer and pulled out similar cases. "I've seen this pattern before. Rich men who think money makes them untouchable, they all make the same mistakes." Sarah felt a spark of something she'd almost forgotten hope. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Bank records, credit card statements, text messages, emails. Every piece of evidence of his affair and financial misconduct. We're going to bury him in his own lies." They worked for 6 hours straight, building a case that painted David not as a cheating husband, but as a predator who'd systematically isolated and manipulated his pregnant wife. Elena's approach was surgical, methodical, devastating. "The psychiatric hold attempt is our secret weapon," Elena explained as evening fell. "It shows premeditation. David didn't just cheat and get caught. He planned to destroy you if you found out." Elena pulled up David's social media accounts, cross-referencing them with Brittany's posts. "Look at this timeline. He's been photographed at events with other women for months, but he made sure you were never invited to those particular gatherings." Sarah's phone had been buzzing all day with increasingly frantic messages from David. The latest one read, "Sarah, please come home. I'm scared for you and the baby. Whatever you think happened, we can work through it together." Elena read the message and snorted. Classic abuser playbook. Love bombing mixed with gaslighting. Save every message he sends. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, we walk into court and request an emergency hearing. I'll need you to be strong. Sarah, David will try to make you seem unstable, paranoid, hormonal. You need to stay calm and stick to facts. Elena leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, I want you to understand something. David has money, connections, and a team of expensive lawyers. This won't be easy. But we can win. We can win. Because at the end of the day, the truth is on our side, and judges don't like men who endanger pregnant women, no matter how much money they have. That night, Sarah stayed in a hotel under Riley's name, too afraid to return to either her house or Riley's apartment. She lay awake thinking about the woman she'd been just a week ago, arranging flowers and trusting her husband's promises. That woman was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her child. She thought about David, probably at home crafting his next series of lies, confident that his money and connections would overwhelm one pregnant woman's word. He was about to learn that he'd chosen the wrong enemy. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered. "Mama's got this." For the first time since this nightmare began, she actually believed it. The Santa Clara County Courthouse felt like a fortress at 8 a.m., all concrete and glass and the weight of justice. Sarah sat beside Elena in courtroom 4, her hands folded protectively over her 8-month belly, watching David's legal team file in like an army. David had hired Morrison, Chase and Associates, the kind of white shoe firm that charged $1,000 an hour and usually got whatever they wanted. Sarah recognized some of the attorneys from society pages. These were the lawyers who defended tech moguls against federal investigations and made corporate scandals disappear. Lead attorney Charles Morrison looked like Central Casting's idea of a powerful lawyer, silver-haired, expensive suit, the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case that mattered. He moved through the courtroom like he owned it, nodding to court staff who clearly knew him well. David himself sat at the opposite table, the picture of concerned husband. He'd chosen his outfit carefully, navy blue suit, wedding ring prominently displayed, expression of wounded bewilderment. When their eyes met across the courtroom, he actually mouthed, "I love you." Sarah wanted to vomit. "Remember," Elena whispered, "stick to facts. Don't let them bait you into emotion." The gallery behind them was unusually crowded. Sarah recognized several tech journalists drawn by whispers of a scandal involving one of Silicon Valley's golden boys. David's attempt at discretion had backfired spectacularly. Judge Patricia Hernandez entered, and Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Hernandez was known for taking domestic abuse cases seriously, especially those involving pregnant women. She'd made headlines for her harsh sentences against men who used the legal system to harass their ex-wives. Morrison stood first, his voice carrying the authority of decades in prestigious courtrooms. "Your Honor, we're here because of a tragic situation. Mrs. Miller is suffering from severe pregnancy-related mental health issues that have led her to construct elaborate conspiracy theories about her devoted husband." He gestured toward David with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Miller is a respected tech entrepreneur who has provided his wife with every luxury, including the finest medical care available. When a simple billing error occurred with their doctor's office, Mrs. Miller spiraled into paranoid delusions about affairs and financial misconduct." Morrison presented a thick file. "We have documentation from medical professionals, statements from friends and colleagues, all confirming that Mrs. Miller has become increasingly unstable, making wild accusations and threatening self-harm." Sarah watched the performance with growing amazement. Morrison made David sound like a saint, selflessly trying to help his troubled wife while building a tech empire that employed thousands of people. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "Mrs. Miller's sister, Riley Chen, has been encouraging these delusions, providing so-called evidence of Mr. Miller's alleged misconduct. This is a classic case of family members enabling paranoid behavior rather than seeking appropriate mental health treatment. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. The lies were so smooth, so believable. Then Elena stood, and something shifted in the room. Your Honor, what Mr. Morrison calls paranoid delusions, I call evidence. Elena's voice cut through the courtroom's air conditioning hum. And what he calls a billing error, I call deliberate medical neglect of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. She approached the bench with her own stack of documents. These are Mr. Miller's credit card statements showing that on the exact same day he canceled his wife's $38,000 prenatal care package, he spent $45,000 on a luxury vacation for his mistress, Brittany Jones. Morrison objected, but Judge Hernandez silenced him with a raised hand. Elena continued, This isn't about infidelity, Your Honor. This is about a pattern of financial abuse designed to control and ultimately destroy Mrs. Miller. The defendant didn't just cheat. He systematically planned to paint his wife as mentally ill if she discovered his deception. Elena presented bank records, text messages, even screenshots from Brittany's Instagram account. The evidence was damning, laid out with prosecutorial precision. Mr. Miller hired Marcus Rodriguez, ostensibly to represent his wife, but Mr. Rodriguez has a history of ethical violations for representing both sides in divorce cases. Your Honor, Morrison interjected, Mrs. Miller's own behavior. Let me finish, Elena said sharply. Yesterday, Mr. Miller attempted to have his wife involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. The timing is suspicious. Your Honor, Mrs. Miller discovers evidence of his affair and financial misconduct on Monday. By Wednesday, he's trying to have her declared mentally incompetent. Elena turned to face David directly. This is domestic abuse through legal manipulation, and it ends today. Judge Hernandez studied the documents for several minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the whisper of papers and someone's nervous breathing. Finally, the judge looked up. Mr. Morrison, your client's behavior raises serious concerns about his fitness as a husband and father. The timing of the psychiatric hold request, combined with the financial evidence presented, suggests a calculated attempt to silence his wife rather than address legitimate grievances. Sarah felt her heart hammering. Judge Hernandez continued, I'm granting Mrs. Miller's request for an emergency protective order. Mr. Miller is prohibited from contacting his wife directly or through third parties. I'm also freezing all marital assets pending a full financial disclosure. David's face went ashen. Morrison was whispering frantically in his ear, but the damage was done. Furthermore, the judge said, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the conduct of attorney Marcus Rodriguez. This court will not tolerate legal professionals who abuse their position to manipulate vulnerable clients. Elena squeezed Sarah's hand under the table. Mr. Miller. Judge Hernandez addressed David directly. You have 48 hours to vacate the marital residence. Mrs. Miller will return home under court protection. As they left the courthouse, Sarah felt like she could breathe for the first time in a week. David's empire of lies was crumbling, and justice was finally within reach. But she should have known David wouldn't go down without a fight. Sarah returned to her Malibu home that evening, escorted by a sheriff's deputy, expecting to find it empty. Instead, she discovered David had left her a gift, every family photo cut in half, her clothes scattered across the bedroom floor, and her laptop smashed beyond repair. The destruction was methodical, calculated to cause maximum emotional damage. Wedding photos lay in shreds across their bed. The baby clothes she'd carefully selected were torn and strewn about the nursery. Even her grandmother's jewelry had been crushed, the pieces scattered like confetti. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the envelope on her pillow with her name written in David's careful handwriting. Inside were medical records she'd never seen before, dated from her first trimester. According to these documents, she'd tested positive for cocaine and opioids during routine prenatal screening. The records were signed by Dr. Williams and contained detailed notes about confronting Sarah about her drug use. Sarah stared at the papers, her hands shaking. They were complete fabrications, but they looked absolutely authentic. Official letterhead, proper medical coding, even a treatment plan recommendation. Someone had spent considerable time and money creating these forgeries. Her phone rang. Elena. Sarah, we have a problem. David's team filed new documents an hour ago. They have medical records showing drug use during your pregnancy. Elena, those are fake. I've never used drugs in my life. I believe you, but they look real, very real, and if a judge believes them, they'll take my baby. Sarah sank onto her bed, surrounded by the wreckage of her former life. Not if we can prove they're forged. But Sarah, this changes everything. David's not just trying to win a divorce anymore. He's trying to have you charged with child endangerment. Sarah looked around the destroyed nursery, at the mobile David had hung himself just weeks ago, now lying broken on the floor. The man who'd once promised to protect her was now trying to destroy her completely. There's something else, Elena continued. Marcus Rodriguez filed a complaint against me with the state bar, claiming I'm harassing him and his client with frivolous accusations. Can he do that? He can try. The bar takes these complaints seriously, even when they're retaliatory. If they suspend my license pending investigation, you'll need new representation. Sarah closed her eyes. David was attacking from every angle, using the legal system as a weapon, corrupting everything he touched. Elena, what if we can't prove the medical records are fake? Then you might lose everything. Your baby, your freedom, your future. After hanging up, Sarah sat alone in her ruined bedroom, feeling the baby's strong kicks against her ribs. In 3 weeks, her child would be born into this nightmare. David had made sure of that. But as she looked at the forged medical records more carefully, Sarah noticed something, a detail so small she almost missed it. But crucial, the date on the first document was from a day she'd been in New York visiting Riley, documented by airline tickets and hotel receipts still in her purse. David's fabrication wasn't perfect after all. Sarah smiled for the first time that day. David thought he was playing chess with someone who'd fold under pressure, but he'd forgotten that she'd been a marketing executive before their marriage, someone who knew how to build campaigns and destroy competition. She photographed the medical records, then called Riley. I need you to bring your laptop and come over immediately. And Riley, call your contact at the Chronicle. It's time to go public. Are you sure? Once this hits the media, there's no going back. Sarah looked at the destroyed photos of their wedding, remembering the woman who'd been so happy to become Mrs. David Miller. That woman was truly gone now. He just handed us the ammunition we need to end this war. Sarah opened her phone and began making calls. Not to lawyers or family, but to journalists, specifically investigative reporters who specialized in exposing powerful men who abused the legal system. If David wanted to play dirty, she'd show him what dirty really looked like. The real fight was about to begin. And this time, Sarah wouldn't be playing defense. Riley's investigative instincts proved invaluable over the next 72 hours. While Elena fought the legal battles, Riley worked her network of journalism contacts to expose David's wider pattern of corruption. I found something big, Riley announced, bursting into Sarah's kitchen Thursday morning with her laptop and 3 cups of coffee. David's been doing this before. Sarah looked up from the baby name book she'd been trying to focus on, though the words kept blurring together. The stress was affecting everything, her sleep, her appetite, even her ability to concentrate on simple tasks. What do you mean? I mean, you're not his first victim. Riley opened her laptop and pulled up a series of news articles. 3 years ago, David was briefly engaged to a woman named Jennifer Walsh, tech marketing executive, about your age, got pregnant right before their wedding. Sarah's blood chilled. What happened to her? According to public records, she had a mental breakdown during the engagement, voluntary commitment to a psychiatric facility, lost her job, eventually moved back to Ohio with her parents. The baby was put up for adoption. Sarah stared at Jennifer's photo, seeing her own story reflected back. The woman looked confident and successful in her corporate headshot, nothing like someone prone to mental illness. He did this to her too. It gets worse. I tracked down Jennifer's former roommate. She agreed to talk off the record. Riley pulled up her notes. Jennifer started asking questions about David's finances right before the wedding. She'd found strange charges, unexplained trips, signs of another woman. And then what? Then she started having episodes, panic attacks, paranoid behavior, emotional instability. But here's the thing. Sarah, the roommate, said Jennifer was convinced someone was drugging her coffee. Sarah's hands went to her throat. The coffee David brings me every morning, Riley nodded grimly. Special blend from a boutique roastery. Same thing Jennifer described. They drove to an urgent care clinic in Santa Monica, where Sarah gave blood and urine samples for a comprehensive drug screen. The results would take 48 hours, but Sarah already knew what they'd find. While they waited, Riley continued her investigation. I also looked into Marcus Rodriguez's client history. In the past 5 years, he's represented both sides in 17 different divorce cases. Always the same pattern. He approaches the wife as a friend, gathers information, then uses it to help the husband destroy her credibility. How is he still practicing law? Because the husbands are all wealthy, powerful men who make generous donations to the right political campaigns, who serve on bar association committees, who have the influence to make problems disappear. Riley showed Sarah the pattern. Tech executives, venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, all men with the resources to make inconvenient wives vanish legally. So David's part of a network. More than that, I think Marcus specializes in helping rich men eliminate inconvenient wives. And I think David's done this before. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Sarah realized she wasn't fighting one corrupt husband and his lawyer. She was fighting a system designed to protect wealthy men from the consequences of their actions. That evening, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number again. Mrs. Miller. This is Jennifer Walsh. I think we need to talk. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Jennifer, how did you get my number? Your sister contacted me through LinkedIn. Mrs. Miller. I know what David's doing to you because he did the same thing to me, and I want to help you stop him. They agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown San Francisco, neutral territory where David's influence couldn't reach. Jennifer Walsh was 34, blonde, and carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to be afraid of her own shadow. But her eyes burned with an intelligence that years of gaslighting hadn't extinguished. David is very good at what he does, Jennifer said, stirring her tea with shaking hands. He makes you fall in love with him, then slowly convinces you that you're losing your mind. Tell me what happened. I found out about his other women 3 weeks before our wedding. When I confronted him, he became concerned about my mental health. Started having doctors friends of his evaluate me. Started documenting my erratic behavior. Jennifer's voice dropped. The coffee was the key. He brought me coffee every morning for months. said it was a special blend he had imported. I didn't realize he was microdosing me with psychiatric medications until it was too late. Sarah's stomach lurched. How did you find out? I stopped drinking his coffee for 3 days before one of the psychiatric evaluations. Suddenly my mind was clear again. But by then, everyone believed I was crazy. My family, my friends, my employer. David's narrative was too convincing. What about your baby? Jennifer's composure cracked. I gave birth in a psychiatric facility. David convinced everyone I was unfit to be a mother. The adoption papers were signed before I was released. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed Sarah photos from that time. The woman in the pictures looked hollow, broken. Nothing like the sharp executive who'd been engaged to David Miller. He has a type, Jennifer continued. Successful women who give up their careers for him. Women who become isolated from their support systems. Women who trust him completely. Sarah reached across the table and took Jennifer's hand. We're going to stop him. How he has money, connections, an entire network of corrupt professionals. I tried to fight him for 3 years. He destroyed every attorney I hired, discredited every piece of evidence I found. Sarah thought about the forged medical records, the systematic destruction of her life, the way David had turned her own friends against her. Then she thought about the drug test results waiting for her, about Elena's fierce determination, about Riley's investigative skills. Because this time, Sarah said, he's not fighting just one woman. He's fighting all of us. For the first time since they'd met, Jennifer Walsh smiled. The drug test results confirmed what Sarah already knew, traces of benzodiazepine and mood stabilizers in her system, consistent with months of microdosing. Elena immediately filed the results with the court, along with Jennifer Walsh's sworn affidavit detailing David's previous pattern of abuse. This changes everything, Elena said, reviewing the lab reports. We can prove he's been systematically drugging you. Combined with Jennifer's testimony, we have a pattern of predatory behavior. But David's counterstrike was swift and devastating. Sarah, you need to see this, Riley said, rushing into the house Friday morning with her phone. David's holding a press conference. Sarah watched in horror as her husband stood before a bank of news cameras, flanked by Morrison and a woman she didn't recognize. David looked haggard, devastated, the picture of a man pushed to his breaking point. My wife is a wonderful woman who is suffering from severe mental illness, David said, his voice breaking at exactly the right moments. I've tried to get her help, but she's become convinced that I'm somehow poisoning her, that I'm involved in elaborate conspiracies against her. The performance was masterful. David had clearly been coached, his every gesture calculated to evoke sympathy. He spoke about loving Sarah despite her illness, about his fears for their unborn child. The unknown woman stepped forward. I'm Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a forensic psychiatrist. I've reviewed Mrs. Miller's case extensively. Her allegations show classic signs of pregnancy-induced psychosis, a condition that makes women believe their partners are trying to harm them and their unborn children. Sarah felt the room spinning. David had found an expert to legitimize his lies. Dr. Hayes continued with clinical authority. Mrs. Miller's claims about being drugged are consistent with paranoid delusions. The substances found in her system could easily be explained by over-the-counter medications or supplements that her confused mental state has caused her to forget taking. What about the financial evidence? A reporter called out. Morrison stepped forward. The credit card charges Mrs. Miller cites as evidence of infidelity are actually business expenses. Mr. Miller frequently hosts clients and potential investors. The resort charge was for a business retreat that Mrs. Miller, in her current state, has misinterpreted as evidence of an affair. The lies were so polished, so believable. Sarah watched David field questions with the perfect mix of love and sorrow, painting himself as a devoted husband trying to save his wife from her own mind. "What about Ms. Jones?" another reporter asked. "Brittany Jones is a social media consultant who helps with our company's marketing outreach," Morrison replied smoothly. "Mrs. Miller's illness has caused her to misinterpret a professional relationship as something inappropriate." Sarah grabbed her phone and called Elena. "Are you watching this?" "Unfortunately, yes. Sarah, this is bad. They're getting ahead of our evidence, creating reasonable doubt for everything we found. What about Jennifer's testimony? They'll claim she's part of your delusion, or that you convinced an unstable woman to corroborate your fantasies." Sarah watched David answer questions with increasing confidence, his narrative gaining traction with each carefully crafted response. The media was buying his story completely. "Elena, we're losing. Not yet. But Sarah, if we're going to win this, we need something they can't explain away. Something that proves David's guilt beyond any doubt." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her living room feeling the baby's increasingly urgent movements. Her due date was 10 days away, and her child would be born into a world where their father had successfully painted their mother as a delusional drug addict. Then Sarah remembered something. David's office computer, the one he thought she'd never learn to access. In her rush to gather evidence, she'd focused on financial records and emails, but David was too smart to leave obvious traces there. But men like David always had insurance policies, ways to protect themselves if their schemes fell apart. And David's arrogance was his weakness. He documented everything, believing himself untouchable. Sarah grabbed her keys and drove to David's office building, using her access card one last time before he thought to cancel it. The executive floor was empty at 7 p.m., David presumably at home preparing for the next phase of his media campaign. His computer was password protected, but Sarah knew David's mind. He was arrogant enough to use the same password for everything their wedding date combined with his Stanford graduation year. She was in. Sarah navigated to David's encrypted files, the ones he thought were hidden behind layers of security. What she found there made her laugh out loud, despite everything. David had documented everything: video recordings of him drugging her coffee, detailed plans for destroying her credibility, financial records showing payments to Marcus Rodriguez and Dr. Hayes, even communications with other men planning similar schemes against their wives. But the most damning evidence was a video journal David had been keeping, documenting his project of systematically destroying Sarah's mental health. His arrogance had compelled him to record his own criminal behavior. David's own need to document his cleverness had created the evidence that would destroy him. Sarah copied everything to a secure drive, then sent it all to Riley, Elena, and 3 investigative journalists simultaneously. By midnight, David's carefully constructed narrative was in ruins. By morning, he was in federal custody, charged with conspiracy, domestic abuse, and drugging his pregnant wife. The man who'd thought he could erase Sarah Chen Miller had instead erased himself. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the nursery of her new home, a cozy craftsman in Berkeley that felt nothing like the cold marble palace in Malibu. Sophia Chen Miller slept peacefully in her arms, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and completely perfect despite the chaos that had surrounded her birth. The nursery was everything Sarah had dreamed of: warm, welcoming, filled with books and handmade toys from friends who'd rallied around her during the trial. Sunlight streamed through windows overlooking a small garden where Sarah planned to teach Sophia about growing things, about nurturing life instead of destroying it. David was awaiting trial on federal charges. His empire collapsed, his reputation destroyed. The evidence from his own computer had been devastating, not just the videos of him drugging Sarah, but communications with an entire network of men who used similar tactics against their wives. Marcus Rodriguez had been disbarred and faced his own criminal charges for conspiracy and corruption. Dr. Hayes had lost her medical license for participating in the scheme. Her career ended by her willingness to help destroy an innocent woman. The documentary Riley was producing about the case had sparked a nationwide conversation about legal abuse and financial manipulation in marriages. Jennifer Walsh had become an advocate for victims of psychological abuse, finally reclaiming her voice after years of silence. Sarah's book deal had provided financial security for her and Sophia, but more importantly, it had given her a platform to warn other women about the sophisticated predators hiding behind wedding rings and wealth. The advance alone was more than David had ever allowed her to spend on herself. "She looks like you," Elena said, visiting for Sunday dinner as had become their tradition. Strong chin, determined eyes. Sarah smiled down at her daughter. "She's going to be stronger than me. This world won't catch her off guard." "You were stronger than you knew," Elena reminded her. "David picked the wrong woman to underestimate." The doorbell rang, and Sarah answered it to find a delivery of fresh peonies, not from David this time, but from the community of women who'd rallied around her. The card read, "For beautiful mothers raising beautiful daughters." As evening fell and their friends headed home, Sarah walked through her small house with Sophia, pointing out the photos on the walls, the books on the shelves, the life they'd built together. Every object told a story of survival, of women supporting women, of justice finally served. "Your daddy thought he could erase us," Sarah whispered to her sleeping daughter. "But we erased him instead." She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, arranging flowers and trusting in promises that turned out to be lies. That woman was gone, but Sarah didn't mourn her. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and absolutely unshakable in her determination to protect what mattered. The baby's nursery was filled with gifts from women across the country who'd followed the story. Hand-knitted blankets, carved toys, books about strong female heroes. Sophia would grow up knowing she was part of a community of survivors. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh, who was now dating a kind teacher in Ohio and slowly rebuilding her life. "Thinking of you and Sophia today. You saved us all." David had tried to cancel their future, but instead he'd liberated them both. His systematic cruelty had backfired spectacularly, creating the very network of strong women he'd tried to destroy. Outside, the Berkeley Hills glowed in the sunset, and Sarah Chen Miller was finally, completely free. She'd learned that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to be erased, to document everything, and to trust that justice, though delayed, would eventually come. Sophia stirred in her arms, opening eyes that would see a world where women like Sarah Chen Miller had paved the way for daughters who would never be silenced.